we're live now, me and you.
We are live.
Let me check that.
Well, hello, people.
Yep. No, I'm alive. I'm checking it.
Yeah, you're alive. I'm alive. And
Yeah.
now we're live.
Right. Okay, let's share a screen. You and a tag team. This is gonna be awesome. Oh, wait, let's mute that. What the hell? All right. You're still here.
I'm still here.
Yeah, but you hear me.
Yes.
You and I are having a conversation right now.
That is correct.
Not even in the same place. How does this happen?
It's the magic of Zoom, Evan. It's the magic of Zoom.
You're in my computer. All right, screw that.
Welcome to class tonight, guys. This one's going to go a little different.
Yeah, I'm already broken. It's not even Friday yet. Let's go ahead and share this. I assume you're seeing the thing. Oh, there's a thing in the middle of the thing there. There we go. How's that look?
Looks good to me.
All right, let's have a conversation. So tonight we're going to do it a little different. We're going to have a conversation. Ryan and the tag team this one. Brad got his shot today, and I don't know if he's, may not be feeling real well. So, but he'll be fine. He's tough. He's got a good, what do you call that? What do you call that when you've got like, not disposition, but you know the word? Help me out here, brother.
Well, there's a lot of them. There's a whole dictionary worth. What are we trying to describe here? The way he feels? I believe the term is
when somebody bounces back, good, you know what I mean?
Resilience.
Take a punch well.
He has good resiliency.
Yeah, let's go with that. All right. May 19th, 2021, class 10. I'm your instructor. Ryan's your instructor. Brad, not your instructor. So that's what we're going to go with. I'm watching the chat too while I'm talking this time. This one's pretty cool.
Brad got his COVID shot, not that he got shot. Just to clarify for everyone, Brad is okay. He's just not feeling well.
Well, I don't know. Okay, you got the shot. You got the shot yesterday. You got.
I did.
Moderna.
I got the Pfizer. I got the Pfizer one.
You got the Pfizer too? Yeah, I
got
Pfizer. All the cool kids are doing Pfizer. That's the rumor. Are we still streaming? Disposition, stamina, mojo. Those are all great words. Attitude.
I like this.
Yeah. See, we're getting some interaction going. All right. Study tips, small amounts, frequently, 20, 30 minutes. I'm studying Spanish right now, believe it or not. And that's exactly what the recommendation is there too. 20, 30 minutes a day. You don't want to kill yourself. You don't want to get frustrated. These small chunks, consistency, that's what's going to get you through. A lot of this stuff is, obviously memory, which, at my age, I don't even have that anymore. So 23 minutes, that's my data retention policy built in. In 23 minutes, I will forget what it is you told me. So it needs to be written down. Flashcard, practice tests, app tests. Everybody's got their way. I told you, class number one, the way I did it, we didn't have really classes or anything then. It was, I read the book 3 times. I read it once and I just told myself going into it that I'm not going to get any of this. I'm just reading. And then the second time I was trying to put those lumps together, trying to put concepts together. And then the third time it was nailed it. Right. And I passed. CISSP, make millions and millions of dollars a year. I mean, it's gravy train after that, right, Ryan?
You got to keep it up, right? So once you get it, then you got to do those pesky little CPEs. So having good study habits now are going to help you with passing the exam, but also with retaining your certification, because you do have to, unfortunately, renew it every couple of years. Mm-hmm. The good news is you won't have to take the exam again.
No, don't. I take naps. I took a nap today. That's good. Do that. Write things down. There's actually science there between writing something down with your hand and memorization. So writing things down helps. Study group. I haven't been in the study group for a while. Ryan, have you?
I check it out every so often. Um, it seems that there's some good activity there. For a lot of folks are sharing successes with each other, sharing study tips. So I would encourage you guys to continue to use that.
Okay. Yeah, I need to get in there again. Been busy. Exercise, fresh air, exercise. I can't believe I said that. All right, go do that too. Uh, let's get going. Study group, there's the URL. If you haven't been there, that's where it is. There's the practice test. And I believe, has the code been given out? The discount code? I believe it has somewhere.
I think we did distribute that, yes.
Okay, so that's probably in the study group. But yeah, CCQ by Clement Dupuis, awesome dude, totally a legend. Okay, that's us. Look at that. I don't look like that anymore. You
just a grayer version. Yeah, no, I still look the same, just more gray. And you still look like that, just more beard. Although babyface Brad over there doesn't look anything like that.
No, not at all. All right. So we're going to discuss this instead of lecturing, which I think is better. I'm thinking maybe we'll do this for the last classes because I have a take on things, based on my experience and what I've done, and you've got yours, and it's always good to get perspectives. Hopefully we'll be able to do that and still get through the 125 slides we got to get through tonight. So we do kind of have to keep going, but when you got something to say, man, speak up. Check in. Yeah, it's kind of doing that already. Chapters 1 through 7 is kind of what we've sort of covered, and we'll finish up tonight. If you are struggling, relax. Just relax. It's okay. Some of this stuff is, some of us have never seen this stuff before, and some of it's weighty. Relax. You're gonna be fine. All right. Quiz. Question number 1. During the course penetration test. What's a penetration test? Don't ask. The developers or the testers discover signs of an active compromise of the new custom developed 3-tier web application. Nobody does 3-tier web application.
I was about to say, what is a circa 92?
Yeah. So what is the best source of action? So, and this happens actually. This more often than you'd think, where you're doing a penetration test and you find out, oh, I'm not the first one here, or somebody's here with me. So it does happen. The answers: attempt to contain and eradicate the malicious activity. Yeah, if you want to get sued, that'd be the thing to do. Continue the test. Yeah, you probably won't get sued, but that's probably not the best answer. Quietly end the test. Immediately call the operational IT contact and escalate the issue. Sounds pretty legit to me. Shut the server down. No. So is your answer? Do you agree, Mr.?
I concur that C is the correct answer.
All right. Easy enough. You would like to have the security firm test the new web application, but have decided not to share underlying source code. What type of test could be used to help determine the security of the custom web application? Secure compiler warnings. Well, if you don't have the source code, it's going to be hard to compile, unless you're going to compile your own code, but then you're not testing their app, so that's not it. You need source code to compile or code. The fuzzing, if you know what fuzzing is just sending a bunch of wacky data at an application to see how it's going to behave and how it's going to react. That's actually sort of could fit here. C, static testing. There's static and dynamic testing. Yeah, static testing would be really having source code. So the other is white box testing. What do you think, Ryan?
I feel like everything except fuzzing requires source code. And the question, so this is a good one for you guys, by the way, when you're taking the exam, pay very close attention to the question, because a lot of times the answer is actually inside the question. So in this one, it says, they did not share the underlying source code. So we know that you need source code for compiler, you need source code for static testing, you need source code for white box testing. So the only answer can be fuzzing.
Let's see. Voila. Voila is spelled really weird. Did you know voila is spelled V-I-O-L-A?
Voila.
No, weird. That ain't right.
It's like Viola.
Yeah, Frank Viola, pitcher for the Twins in the
Hmm.
80s. Question 3, what type of penetration test will result in the most efficient use of time and hourly consultant expenses? Automated knowledge, as opposed to the not automated, the manual knowledge. Full knowledge, so that would be having everything, right? Having documentation, having source code, having everything. Partial knowledge, kind of having split, not split, and zero knowledge, which would be, uh, you know, no source code, right? You're basically coming at this thing cold. So the best one here would be B, full knowledge. Because when you have a full knowledge test, looking at the source code, looking at documentation, it gives the penetration testers a nice plan of attack. Where would we go to hit this thing with the most possible effect? Plus, if I have sort, I can use dynamic uh, tools to that source code. So that's all. For what term describes a holistic approach for determining the effectiveness of access control and has a broad scope. Big words here: holistic, so meaning like everything, uh, access control, and broad scope. So security assessment, yeah, that's pretty broad and holistic. Security audit, that's the checkboxy thing, probably not all that holistic. Penetration test, that's more narrowly focused. Vulnerability assessments, so vulnerabilities, threats, exploits. Vulnerability assessments also, narrower in scope. So I'm going to go with A. What are you going to go with, Ryan?
I think A is the correct answer. It's also where everybody should start. So it's good that it's A.
One time I was, well, I've done this more than once actually. Whiteboard, you go to a client. I was shaved because I did more client work at that time. But, you're writing things out on a whiteboard and you're abbreviating things. Be careful when you abbreviate the word assessment.
Yes.
Securities, yeah, in a client
And you don't
environment.
want to be the security ass ever.
Good point. I don't.
Be nice. Play
Okay.
well.
Play well. Yep. What term describes a black box testing method that seeks to identify and test all unique combinations of software inputs? Combinatorial software testing,
Sounds a
dynamic
lot like a
testing.
combination.
It does sound combination. Dynamic testing, misuse case testing, static testing. So all kinds of different tests. Combinatorial would be, basically a combination of static and dynamic testing. So manual and using tools. Dynamic testing primarily, using tools, changing as you go. Misuse case testing would be fuzzing is an example of a misuse case testing methodology, and then static testing, tutorial. So using all those would be your right answer. And we don't use that word much, combinatorial software testing, but for the exam, you'll need to know that. We don't normally, when you do a penetration test or when you're doing these types of testing, normally you don't talk through like this. It's usually pretty standardized, on what kind of testing we're going to do, what tools we're going to use, time frames for when we're going to test, boundaries, scope, all those things kind of get fleshed out. But I don't think I've ever used combinatorial software testing in a statement of work before.
I don't think I've ever used that in my career to describe what we were going to do. It's try to stay away from the $10 words. It just confuses the client.
Yep. But in the test, that's your answer. What term describes a no-tech, low-tech method that uses the human mind to bypass security controls? Fuzzing, that's an automated, and that we could do, you could do, I guess, mental fuzzing. That I do that with my wife, where I just talk a whole bunch of gibberish and see how she's going to react. But
Samesies.
that's not the right. But that's not what we're talking here. Social engineering, it's hard to get past that one. That is the right answer. It's attacking the human. And for people that are interested, I've got a ton of social engineering stories. it was a lot of fun doing a lot of that work. But your place to go if you want to kind of get the authority, Chris Hadnagy is your guy. Hadnagy. Couple of three actually now, I think, books on it. Just amazing dude. So war dialing is that's where we would attack modems, and we would just dial every number, usually sequentially, just through the entire uh, scope of the of the test. But that's for attacking modems. Zero knowledge test doesn't play here. Uh, it's just like you said, you don't know anything about what you're attacking. You're just kind of coming in dark. So B, that's the answer. Yay us. All right, page 363 is the new stuff. This is domain 7, chapter 8, security operations, e.g., foundational concepts, investigations, incident management, and disaster recovery. I like incident management. You already covered half of that, but
I did.
that's something I jam. I dig incident management. Disaster recovery.
Well, and I would argue that this particular domain is probably the most relevant to what you'll actually do and what you'll actually interact with in your career as a security professional.
Right. Yep. Very true. Oh,
Dad joke.
It's coming right now. Why did the coach go to the bank, Ryan?
Oh, I don't know.
To get his quarterback. That's right. Boo. It's a Patriots fan. All right, so I think this is where we left off. It's kind of weird. We left off at step 1, which is preparation. The methodology. Now, with incident response, that you'll find is there are multiple different companies, different places called their steps differently. What's important to remember in incident response is the flow. The actual names of each one of these steps, there'll be different names in different places, but knowing that detection comes before response, right? Or identification. You have to understand what it is you're dealing with if you're ever going to have any hope of containing what's happening, right? So identification obviously comes first, before containment. Now you'll probably see the same sort of thing. I need to turn it up and you need to turn it down. How the hell do I do that?
So I don't know.
Maybe I'll just talk louder. Ryan, can you hear me all right?
I can. And Larry, I can't help but be loud, man. I'm sorry.
He's a loud dude.
I'm a loud dude.
And I'm a soft-spoken dude, so I'll try to speak up. All right. So detection, what we're trying to do is really figure out what it is we're working with. In a real incident response, we have a number of scripts that we typically run at this point, trying to figure out, pulling logs, trying to get evidence of like what is going on. And once you get a good understanding of that, then you move to containment. It's not uncommon for people to suck at number 2. And they think that they're getting containment, but they never identified, the initial attack vector. And so they find themselves in containment again, and you start playing whack-a-mole. So, it's real important to get these steps kind of figured out first. So detection is that, identification, and then, in containment, not only are you trying to sort of keep the attack, narrow the scope of the attack, but you're also, collecting evidence and protecting that evidence as you're going. Mitigation. So once you've got containment, if you've got containment, then it's time to start getting things sort of out of the environment, try to restore the environment back to its original condition. Now, the most common attacks, obviously, that you're seeing today are ransomware attacks. So sometimes your eradication is, restoring from backup potentially. That might be part of your eradication strategy. Really, really important that you get that root cause analysis done before you go to eradication. Otherwise, you walk away. I've seen this happen so many times. You think you've got it eradicated, and you start wrapping up the incident response, the active incident response. You walk away, and you get a call the next day or 2 days later that it's back again. It's probably because you never identified the root cause. Right? Root cause is different than attribution. Attribution is who where did this come from? Who is the person behind the keyboard? That in most incident responses, we never even go there. Too expensive.
It's very expensive, and a lot of times it's a wasted exercise, because even if you can attribute it, generally you're going to attribute it back to some IP on some poor person's computer that's been compromised, and you're never really going to find the bad guy.
Somebody says maybe my beard's in the way.
Well, you do mumbly once in a while. Maybe we just got to get you a better mic setup.
Everybody always says that, man. I had this other mic set up before, like this one. This is the Yeti.
Right? Jonathan, to answer your question, step 3 is really where you should be doing a lot of your forensic evidence collection.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when you're going to be going ahead and doing those bit by bit image compare. You're going to make your bit by bit image copies using your forensic software. You're going to get that stuff off the network. And then any investigation you're going to do against those bit by bit copies, not against the actual source drive itself.
Yeah, and step 1 was preparation. So, yep, which you covered, I think, probably last
I did.
Monday. All right, and then reporting, right? Being able to write concise reports. Sometimes, so these are the steps. At this point, you've probably already engaged legal counsel at some point. Hopefully, that's not officially in here, but legal counsel usually gets involved. You want to be careful what you report. A lot of times legal counsel now is telling you to do verbal reporting as opposed to documented reports, because that becomes discoverable in court. So careful with the reporting. But as far as the exam, these are the steps. Recovery. So putting everything back to normal, increasing monitoring. You decrease monitoring just in case there was a gap in your root cause analysis and maybe you didn't actually eradicate. That's all part of the recovery. Remediation, and then those lessons learned. People don't like the word postmortem, but that's still what I call it. But it's really where you get everybody together. What happened? What did we learn? What can we do better? How can we prevent this from happening again in the future? Where did our communication break down? Communications are almost always the gaps, and usually in communication and incident response. Just kind of a pro tip. Usually you want to have somebody on your incident response team who's responsible for internal communications and somebody on your team who's responsible for external communications. Internal meaning the message that I'm going to give to employees, executive management, that stuff. Rumors go fast with these things. I have a saying that empty spaces always get filled. So whatever that gap is in your communication, expect it to get filled, usually with like assumptions. People will race to judgment. So having somebody dedicated to that internal communication really saves you a lot of time. And then also on the external, obviously you only want people that are authorized to speak with the press and that stuff to happen. What's another pro tip? A scribe.
Yeah, scribes. I'll add something that I talked about last class, which is think of this whole process as a recycling symbol, and your lessons learned should inform your plan. Every step through this should inform the next step. And the better you do that, the better you're going to be able to handle the next incident. The faster you're going to be able to respond, the more effectively you'll be able to contain it, the more effectively you'll be able to recover quicker. So keep in mind that lessons learned should always be put back into the plan.
Bingo. And the scribe piece is really important if you have, larger incidents. So normally you classify your incidents high, medium, low. Those high ones are the ones that are like really significant. And that's where you have your incident response team assembled. A member of that team should be assigned the scribe responsibilities. And the reason why that's important is it's so disruptive when you've got the incident response going and then somebody new jumps in to work on the incident. They're like, okay, where are we at? And then you got to stop, explain to them where you're at. Whereas if you have a scribe, it's just like read the notes. And then once you're done reading the notes, jump in. You know what I mean? So it's an efficiency thing. All right. Incident response. We do have a bunch of free resources. So, outside of this, I've taught a lot of classes on incident response. So I've got a lot of free stuff from those days. I know that FRSecure has a free incident response plan that they give out. use it as a template. So if you want some free resources on incident response, the thing about incident response is it's inexcusable to not have an incident response strat, because the way these things work is, because I've been in arguments with executive management before, like, well, why do we need one? We're not going to have an incident. It's like, can you guarantee you're not going to have an incident? And they're like, well, no. Well, then you're going to have it, right? Eventually, you're going to need your plan. It's a numbers game. It takes time, but it'll happen.
And have a good plan. Don't have a plan like some of my early clients that said, pray, cry, call Ryan. That's not a solid plan.
Right. Dude, I've come into incident responses before where they're like, well, what should we do? And my inside voice came out, and I said, I know, right? Have you ever done that? And I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, especially when it's like middle of the night and it was update your resume. And they're like, what? Oh, oh shit. I said that out loud. But that is, keep that resume updated. You might need it. Yeah, it's crazy. I have so many incident response stories too. It's kind of funny. Okay, so now we're into operational, preventative, and detective controls, intrusion detection, and so this was all incident response management, just methodology. There's NIST ACE 800 dash. Let's call it. Come on, if you want a good one, 800-61 revision 2. If you want, kind of more on incident response stuff. There's actually a really good career just in incident response. So if you're one of those people that can work cool under pressure, you can make a really good living being an incident responder. All right, operational, preventative, and detective controls. So you remember way back when we talked about preventive controls, detective controls, corrective controls, all these different types of control. These are preventative, or preventive, that use those interchangeably, preventative and preventive, and detective. So you would use this after something's already happened as well, to detect it, right? So you can respond quickly. There is a correlation between time to detect and impact usually. So the quicker you detect things, the faster you can respond and limit the impact. So remember about intrusion detection and intrusion prevention systems, you've got these different types of alerts, right? A true positive alert is the one you want, right? That means it tripped and it was a positive alert. It was actually legit. Where'd you go, Ryan?
I'm still here.
Ryan? Well, but I feel like I'm by myself now. A true negative is when it didn't detect something that it should have detected. That's called a true negative. So somebody, maybe there's an active infection on the network and you never got an alert. That's a true negative. Usually get true negatives because it's either a novel attack, meaning you've never seen it before, the signatures have never seen it before, or you tuned your IDS IPS system poorly. Tuning means like you get these alerts and you're going to tune out the false positives and the false negatives, right? That's how you make the IPS IDS system more effective, as you tune it. It used to be, it would take 6 to 9 months of tuning an IDS system before it became functional or usable. Now it's a lot better, but that's usually why you get those true negatives. You tuned it too much. You didn't, a tuning would be you get an alert and you go to investigate, right? You find out, oh no, this was a legitimate application on a legitimate system communicating legitimately. I'm going to tune out that traffic. That's why you get true negatives. False positives are it tripped. It told you that something bad was happening when it actually wasn't. And then you also have those false negatives, which are that's a poor tuning as well.
And I'll just add, the better you know
Actually,
your environment,
I got that. I
the
totally
better
got
you
that
can
wrong.
tune.
True negatives are good too. True negatives and true positives are good. I got my false negative and my true negative messed up. Sorry, man. I interrupted you, but I had to correct my own mistake.
No worries. I was just saying the better you know your environment, the easier and quicker you can tune effectively.
Go. And you want to tie these processes, these procedures into your incident response plan, right? Because these are inputs. When you talk about the very beginning of an incident response plan, it's going to be based on inputs where you're getting your data from, whether it be a user, whether it be an IDS IPS system, whether it be some other alerting and a SIM system, or all stuff. All right, so NIDS, hip, NIDS, NIDS, NIPS, hip, HIDS, and HIPS. So DSPS, it's just detection or prevention. So NIDS is just a network intrusion detection system. It just sits on the network and it just detects things. It doesn't stop anything. Whereas a NIPS, a network intrusion prevention system, based on the rules, it would block traffic automatically. Same thing with HIDS and HIPS. It's just host based. A good strategy would be to have a combination of these things, where you've got host-based intrusion detection and host-based or network intrusion detection. Now, what's happened over time is host-based intrusion detection and prevention has been wrapped up in what we've called now endpoint detection and response. Right, so EDR in the real world, I doubt you're going to see EDR on the exam, but that's what's happening now. Different ways that these things work, pattern matching. So it's not a signature. Uh, well, actually, usually it is. But we've seen these attacks before, so it goes into a signature base. And then if the system sees something matching that signature, it's going to trip. So pattern matching is the most accurate, but it's also the most likely to miss novel attacks. Right? A new attack, it's not even going to know about. So if you just use pattern matching, that's the downfall. The good thing is you're not going to have a lot of false positives because it matches. Protocol behavior is, something we've gone and talked about, how TCP/IP works. We've talked about, the three-way handshake and all that good stuff. This would be something that sort of violates what's normal in protocol behavior. That's the difference between that and anomaly detection. Anomaly detection is just something that is outside of the ordinary on the network or on the system. So anomaly detection is the most likely to give you false positives, but it's also the most likely to catch things you've never seen before. So you want a combination of these in, most modern systems. Security information and event management. So this is this is garbage in, garbage out. Often the effectiveness of your SIM solution is going to be based on how well you're feeding data into it and then how well you're tuning it. So the way it works is it collects logs. It collects information from various systems on the network and then correlates those things, right? So you can see what's happening over here, on this network segment and what's happening over there on that network segment and correlate those things. A lot of times you won't see an attack or it won't be obvious until you put things into context. You take the left hand and the right hand and put them together and it's like, holy crap, there's an attack. SIMs are good for that. Where I say garbage in, garbage out is if you haven't configured logging correctly, haven't configured those endpoints correctly, they may not be sending good data to your SIM solution, right? And then you're not going to get alerted to it. That's
Well,
probably the biggest problem I see in these.
And we've seen it so many times. I lived through many an event where either time was wasted chasing a bad alert out of the SIM, which then something real was happening that wasn't being captured, or they missed it altogether because they weren't collecting anything past the most basic logs. So you're absolutely right, garbage in, garbage out, and it's only as trustworthy as the data and the rule sets that you have set up within it.
Very true. Absolutely. Continuous monitoring is, important. That's part of your strategy. Continuous monitoring is what it means. It's continuous. So SIM solution, NIDS, NIPS, HIDS, and HIPS. If they're configured correctly, that's also continuous monitoring where your EDR solution is reporting whatever else you've got on the network. That's the continuous monitoring function. Attacks always happen kind of when it's like Murphy's Law. They always seem to happen when you kind of least expect it. You're trudging along happy and all of a sudden everything goes off and it's usually like 3 o'clock in the morning, so that continuous monitoring is important. And the data loss prevention. So DLP, data loss prevention, It also works a lot like, nips and hips, really, where it's looking for specific things, specific configurations, all the way up into the application layer that that are not permitted, right? And then those things will be blocked. It's meant to block the loss of data. The strategy here is typically a network based and a host based data loss prevention solution. It's a combination, but that's DLP. Here's NIDS and NIPS. Now you can see the NIDS is really just hanging off. We talked about promiscuous mode way back when. Your NID and your NIP, they'll run in promiscuous mode. So uh, that network interface card will be in promiscuous mode, listening to all the traffic on the wire and processing all that traffic on the wire. We talked about network. We talk about uh, network taps. We talked about configuring the switch to forward traffic to all traffic from all switch ports into this switch port. You got to configure that stuff correctly if you want it to work. Now the two differences here is you see NIDS is off to the side. It's not in line, whereas your NIPS, your network intrusion prevention system, is in line. That's a traditional configuration. You can have your NIPS actually now outside of the line of traffic, but that's not for the exam. That's what you need to remember right there. Continuous monitoring, assessing, reassessing, ongoing processes. Yeah, that's your continuous monitoring. You usually couple this with assessments, right? So you'll do higher level, um, maybe risk assessments, security assessments, and then supplement that with continuous monitoring between the time you do assessments. It fills that gap. Data loss prevention. Yeah, we talked about that too. So there you go. Endpoint stuff. Now, endpoint detection and response today really takes these and combines them all into sort of one, which is good and bad, right? It's good because it's less applications I need to run to get all these functions. It's also bad because one error potentially in your configuration of your EDR, you lose all of this possibly, right? So HIDs and HIPs, we talked about that. Antivirus, that's I think we've talked about that already in this class as well. Two types, signature based, and we've got the anomaly, which is heuristic is what we usually call that. Types of antivirus looking for malware, and hopefully stopping the execution before it runs. Application whitelisting is really the most effective control for endpoint because my system will only run applications that are specifically permitted. The difference between whitelisting and blacklisting, and now we're using different words, right? So I don't know how politically correct this is anymore.
Red and green. Red and green are the new terms. The exam will still use white and black to the best of my knowledge.
Yeah. So doing both is fine. And some people that get offended, it's just okay. Because I grew up with whitelist and blacklist. So occasionally people will have to correct me and respectful, be corrected. So application whitelisting, essentially it's default deny. Nothing runs on the system unless it's specifically permitted to run on the system. That's default deny. Default allow means everything runs on the system unless I disable it or tell it it can't. So whitelisting, always the more effective method to go. And we've talked a lot. I don't know if we've talked a lot about it here, but zero trust architecture is a big thing that people are talking about. That would require a default deny approach. Removable media controls, so stopping people from using flash drives or removable hard drives. That's also a good preventative control. You could turn on alerting so that it would become a detective control. Log that, feed it to your SIM, and your SIM would alert to you anytime somebody puts a flash drive into the computer. That's how it's preventative versus detective. Disconnection, yes, do it. But that's a good preventative and detective control. And then privileged access, PAM, privileged access management. Cool. Are you logged in as FRSecure? Is it
Yeah.
You? Nice. I'm just Evan. All right, sandboxing. That's another thing on the exam. Knowing the concept, knowing sort of how it works is really important. Really, what sandboxing is, it will take specific processes, specific applications, maybe even. You can break it up into different levels, and really things execute in the sandbox. And in that sandbox is determination is made on whether or not this is malicious, right? So it's a place to execute code, run things before you allow it into your operating system. One of the most common, sandbox methods that we use is, machine, right? I will detonate malware in a virtual machine on my computer, but I won't do that obviously on my computer, right? So we would do that for testing. That's a sandbox approach. Other things that run in sandboxes, Java, you know, runs in its own Java virtual machine, which is also sandboxed. Uh, yeah, I think did you guys ever talk about difference between Java, like mobile code, difference between Java and like ActiveX controls? Have we talked about that yet?
Mm, I don't think we've gotten into that yet. We might have glazed over it during software security, but
Okay, because ActiveX control, uh, which are kind of, I mean, they're going away or gone away, but the way they would secure that would be with code signing. So it'd have to have a valid certificate for that to run. Anyway, honeypots. We've talked about honeypots before. Just be careful when you're running a honeypot if you're going to use any of that for any kind of legal prosecution, because a case could be made that you're doing entrapment versus enticement. Entrapment's illegal, enticement isn't. Uh, Now, in private matters, it doesn't really matter, right? But if it's ever going to go criminal, where you could get yourself into a pickle is, let's say you set up a honeypot, and it really is using kind of, I mean, you're luring people into your honeypot, right? With some, you know,
with a very
interesting
poorly
behavior.
configured firewall, yes.
Right. Or even like maybe you're even sending messages on a forum, right? Or something, tipping people off that, hey, there's a system, you know, so you can get some attacks on it. Because I've seen that happen too. Well, this could go really, really bad for you if one of those attackers decides to store child pornography on your honeypot.
Correct.
If you entrap them, now yeah, it's just a messy, messy thing. So just be careful with your honeypots. Know the difference between enticement and entrapment. And if you have a question, there's nothing wrong with talking to your legal counsel before you set these things up, right? But the cool thing about honeypots is you learn a lot, right? It's cool to, you usually turn up logging, so you can see step by step sort of what took place. Those are cool. Honey nets is just a bunch of honeypots working together on a network.
Well, and
All
just
right.
one last piece on that. Today, this has evolved into what we call deceptive technology. So if you hear people talking about using deceptive technology, they're just talking about advanced honey netting. It's the same exact concept. It's just they've layered some additional intelligence or maybe some magic AI on top. But they're basically the exact same thing.
Yeah, very, very good point. And a lot of times those deception technologies are used internal too, right? I would never run a honeypot on my internal network, but running deception technology is pretty common on the internal network because you want to kind of lure the attackers away to something that looks really juicy to them, but that'll also trigger some alerts so that you can respond to it before they get to your gold. Good point, dude. All right, asset management also important. Just like you don't want to abbreviate assessment, probably don't want to abbreviate asset management either, right? You only save two letters in the first word, so why would you do it? I've done it. That's why I bring it up. Asset management. Uh, you can't protect the things you don't know you have, right? That's just logic. And so it's funny how few people have asset inventories. That's step one. Once you've got the asset inventory, now you need to control the assets. That means you need to configure them correctly, right? And so configuration management is a really important piece of your security, I guess, puzzle, your security program. Uh, there's hardened baseline configurations. If you need help, there's lots of places you can go. One of my favorite places is to go to CIS because they've been doing it for so long, so they've got their nice baselines, and they also have different levels, right? So I can do, maybe my environment isn't ready for a level 2, so I'll just do a level 1 baseline. At least I have a baseline. Baselines are important not only to prevent bad things from happening, but they're also a good detective control, because if I've got good configuration management and I've got good change control, well, then theoretically anything that changes on my network that didn't go through change control is potentially an attack. It's an incident, right? And so you would handle it that way. And we've done that before, where we've handled unauthorized changes. Turns out that was internal, but we still handled it as an incident because we didn't know until we did our investigation. And the cool thing is you just wasted a bunch of people's time. So now you get a black eye for not following process.
Well, it's part of that anomaly detection, right? So if you do asset management good enough, you can actually get very aggressive with anomaly detection.
Mm-hmm. Yep, totally. So here really the focus is on configuration management. CIS is one place. There's the benchmarks. We can go get those and play around and take a look at them. They're free. Another place you can go is the STIGs, right? The Security Technical Implementation Guides. This is a little more strict. Used to be a Department of Defense method of configuration management, but still out there and still updated and still cool. So go play with those if you want. Basic principles that are covered here. One is asset management, like we talked about way back in domain 2. You can't possibly protect the things you don't know you have, right? Asset management is really important. Hardware, software, data. The second part of that is I can't secure the things I can't control, right? So I need to have some level of control over these things if I want to secure them. That means configuration management, that means change control, that means access control. Those are all really, really important. So they're basic principles, even though they're so basic. I mean, they're like basic, right? There's people still aren't doing them. It's like, I've been doing
literally every big event this week in the news is a direct result of not doing basic config management.
Yeah. And you get all kinds of excuses, it's operationally cumbersome.
Okay. Never a valid excuse.
Not in my mind, but whatever. Okay, so baselining is this is normal, right? So it's taking, whether it be network traffic, understanding what's normal network traffic, with normal server operations, what's normal application operations, all those things, what is normal in the environment. That's a baseline, right? And then you look for deviations of those baselines, including traffic sources, right? That's another big one. If you normally see all your, remote access traffic, for instance, coming from the United States, and you start seeing some hits coming from Romania, that's a deviation from your baseline. So might be a thing. Vulnerability management. So vulnerabilities come in 2 flavors. Typically, it's poor configuration or it's a software bug. It's a what's the word I'm looking for? Missing patch.
Flaw in the code.
If they've been patched. There you go. Flaws in code. There you go. So it's either poor configuration or a code error. Flaws in code. Those are the 2 things that, where vulnerabilities come when you talk about technical vulnerabilities. So poor configurations is a really big deal, i.e. default passwords, right? i.e. running a whole bunch of services on your server that you don't need, right? Any one of those could potentially be a vulnerability because it's a weakness. Vulnerability and weakness are synonymous. The other types are missing patches. So I don't know what the latest numbers are in terms of how many errors per KLOC. KLOC is 1,000 lines of code. That's what KLOC stands for. Used to be, what was acceptable was maybe 10 to 12 errors per KLOC. I think we've gotten better at that as an industry, but that means for every 1,000 lines of code, there are potentially 10-ish.
Current stat is 15 to 50 per 1,000. So we're actually trending in the wrong direction.
Bummer. All right. Anyway, when you think of that, and then how many lines of code are in like Windows 10, I mean, there's millions of lines of code in Windows 10. So if you do the math, there's a lot of errors in Windows 10, and you do the math like, okay, this is the, because I've done this before because I'm weird. I've done like, okay, if it's at the time it was 10 errors per 1,000 lines of code, and for instance, Windows XP is 5 million lines of code. How many errors would I expect in that code? And then look at how many vulnerabilities have been disclosed in Windows XP, and then you have a delta. So it kind of gives you an idea of like how many vulnerabilities are still left, maybe. Isn't that weird? That'd be something I'd do. But anyway, vulnerability. So vulnerability is only one part of risk. I don't want people to get mixed up with thinking a vulnerability is a risk that you need to patch your vulnerabilities right away. That's not true. There's two pieces to risk. It's vulnerabilities and threats. So if you have a vulnerability and there's no applicable threat, well, then there's no risk. Right? This is where you start getting a little bit more deep into maturing your vulnerability management program. But at the beginning, you might think, well, I'm just going to go with the CVSS score, right? The Common Vulnerability Scoring System score, and say everything that's 7 or above has to get remediated. Things that are 10, which is critical, patched within 30 days or whatever, right? You may start there, but then eventually you'll start mixing in the other pieces. Right?
Usually after you apply a patch that breaks stuff.
Well, thankfully that stuff doesn't happen as much as it used to, man. Do you remember that? I remember the day when I had to use HFNetCheck. Do you remember HFNetCheck?
Yeah, because if you didn't use it and you went and applied it, you'd be rebuilding a system.
Well, even before that, because you didn't have updates in the operating system, you had to run the client tool HFNetCheck, and it would go and ping Microsoft. And this was back when Michael Shavlik. Do you remember Shavlik?
Rings a bell, but I don't know.
Yeah, Shavlik, Shavlik. So if you Google Shavlik, he came from Microsoft and they had a company out here. Anyway, long story. Oh yeah. All right. So there's hey, Greenbone. That looks like OpenVAS, Open Vulnerability Assessment System. That's where this forked from, believe it or not. This is Nessus, another common vulnerability scanning tool. So these are two tools that you could use to do vulnerability scanning. Scan your network, looking for missing patches, looking for configuration errors. Yeah, just a couple of popular ones. Other ones, Qualys, Rapid7, those are other popular ones. This is the process for, vulnerability management. Now, identify and prioritize your assets, right? So sometimes you can use vulnerability scanners to help you manage your asset inventory, right? So you have your asset inventory, you scan your networks, you find a bunch of assets you didn't know you had, populate your asset inventory with that, right? Same with applications, because when you do a vulnerability scan, if you do it authenticated, you can scan the entire stack. Meaning I can see all the applications that are running on this system, right? So it can be a dual purpose. But this is the common process. Identify and prioritize your assets, identify vulnerabilities, usually through vulnerability scans, remediate those vulnerabilities, those ones that you find unacceptable. You will never remediate all of your vulnerabilities, so don't set that as a goal. So the ones that are the, most critical, I guess. And then verify and measure, put numbers to it. You can't manage what you can't measure. So, and then continue cycle. Pretty standard. Oh, and I've got those in the background again. Here's ISO. So if you like ISO, and I think this is probably a copy validation because I copy and pasted out of a copyrighted material here. Don't turn me in. I don't think they'll get me in trouble. But section
No, because you cited it.
There
This
you
is
go.
fair. This is fair use because it's cited and it's educational.
Right. So section 12.6 of ISO. This is standard. This is part of the 2700, 27,000 series. That's just an explanation. You don't have to memorize that. It's basically what it is we just talked about. But it is good to cite if you're building your own vulnerability management program, starting with policy. Citing these things would be good. Another just longer words saying the same things that we basically said. finding those vulnerabilities doesn't necessarily mean that they're risks. You need to take into account at some point, what the threats are. Because some vulnerabilities I've lived in my environments that I've managed for ever. It's just there's no threat to it. I don't care. What's a common one for that? Maybe
Well, wouldn't we call that residual risk that we have accepted?
yeah, like I would say like self-signed certificates on internal systems.
That's a good example.
I don't care. You know what I mean? Uh, yeah. All right, 0-day vulnerabilities and exploits. Now, this is the official definition that you'll need to know for the exam. If you talk to everyday security people, they have all kinds of different definitions. These are good definitions, but a 0-day vulnerability is essentially a vulnerability that's been identified that there's no patch or workaround for. That's a 0-day vulnerability. A 0-day exploit is the same thing, but an exploit, not a vulnerability. So a 0-day exploit would be there's an exploit available or identified. It may not even be available because you may keep it locked up, but there's an exploit for that there's no workaround for. There's no patch for it yet. That's a 0-day. Easy enough. Yeah, and that window is decreasing. It used to be we would have, I don't know, weeks, maybe even months before, when a vulnerability was disclosed or a patch was released before you had to, actually patch it. That window has gotten much shorter now because the attackers have gotten much better at reverse engineering the patches, for one. So when Microsoft releases a patch, while we're applying it, attackers are reverse engineering it to create an exploit for the people who didn't apply it. So it's really important to apply patches as quickly as you can. Change management. So change management is what it is, right? When you've got a system set the way it's set, assuming it, let's say that it's a secure state. Every transition from this state should remain in a secure state if we want this to stay secure. So changes have to be vetted, right? They have to go through some process. Is the change, is it required? Is it needed? What is it going to do? Functionality of the system? Is it going to break the system? Is it not going to break the system? Has it been tested? Is there a back out? If the change doesn't go according to plan, can I back out and keep the system going? What security vulnerabilities? Has there been a security evaluation of this change? Those are all kind of important things, right? In my environment. So the general flow that's listed here, and it's not an exact science. I don't think I've ever seen two change management functions exactly the same. You know what I mean? I've similar for sure. But this is a general works. Identify what the change is, you know, which usually means document it as well. Propose the change, right, to a change control board, to the owner of the system, whoever. Assess the risk with the change. That means to confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The availability piece is it going to break this? Testing the change, ideally, and most change, significant changes. You wouldn't do this with like I'm adding a new user kind of change. I'm talking like code changes. Is it going to break anything? Test it, back it out. How do I get this thing out of the environment? Schedule the change. A lot of times we have change windows in environments. So, the change window maybe is from 6 until 10 o'clock on Wednesday nights, and that's it. There are no changes to the environment, the rest, unless it's an emergency change. So scheduling the change, notifying the impacted parties, implementing the change, and then reporting the results, closing that ticket. That's all standard stuff. Yeah, and track those changes, audit those changes. In a really tight environment, you will actually go and audit changes. You will map those changes to the changes. You'll map those changes to the change from the baseline, the last previous baseline, right? If there's anything different, that's an indication something's amiss. Somebody's not following the process or you've been compromised. SLAs, service level agreements, these are good. I like service level agreements. These are a way that you can hold your vendors, hold your providers accountable for certain things, right? Whether it be uptime, whether it be how much bandwidth I'm supposed to, response times, all those things can go into a service level agreement. The more critical the things you are, I guess, using, the more important it is to have a service level agreement in place. Don't just assume that there is one. You know, critical applications and critical business processes, you certainly want to validate that you have them and then monitor it. It's crazy how many people have service level agreements and never monitor compliance with it.
I'll even go one further. I think the most important bullet point on this screen is organizations must negotiate all security terms of an SLA prior to engaging the company. There are so many times in my career that I've come across SLAs that either had very vague language or no language to describe notification timelines, shared responsibilities. So make sure that that security component is really thorough, especially these days with all of us relying on some cloud service of one form or another. It's super, super important. Otherwise, it becomes a finger point, and that just adds time to your incident response.
Yep, good advice for sure. All right, now on to fault backups. This is really important. Obviously, it's crazy how we've gone. I can't remember who I was talking to. Maybe it was Oscar, I think at FRSecure, who were talking about, backups. The safest backups were the ones that we were using, like 5 years ago, when you backed up to tape, tape library and took that stuff off site. That the ultimate air gap. It's a bummer.
Yeah, well, I agree. Right as they started to get rid of tape, it came back into fashion. And actually, there's some really cool new tape solutions that I was looking at. IBM put out some pretty badass stuff. So
go back. Yeah, go back to what worked, man. I don't know why we like to do that in this industry, is fix things that are not broken.
And then go back to the basics. I don't know.
Yeah, fix weren't broken, and then go back to the things that you fixed that weren't broken.
But remember, if it's in orange, you want to memorize. So here your key takeaway is full backup, incremental backup, and differential backup. So full is exactly like what it sounds like. It's the entire backup. Incremental is going to be what happens in between full backups. But you make them at a regular schedule. So every, say, hour, you make a new snapshot, basically. And then differential is the difference between the incrementals, if I'm recalling this correctly.
Right. And the Stewart's thing, the recovery time objective was potentially too slow, but there were other strategies that could accommodate that, for most. So what you do is you'd keep an online backup and you do a tape backup, right? And so your recovery time objective for your normal everyday outages you'd pull that from online. But, serious bad things where the disaster recovery plan comes into play, that's when you pull out, potentially the tape backups. And recovery point objectives have to deal with data. So how much data can we afford to lose? Not necessarily, time as much. So good question though, or a good point. I think a lot of times too, it's just lazy. I don't think people like to work as much as they used to like to work. Maybe, I don't know. Instant gratification. We are going so fast. Maybe there's not time. Maybe we're just too damn busy. There's lots of reasons, but tried and true worked. All right, so full backups, incremental backups, and differential. So here is the full backup. It's basically everything, right? And different types of full backups. Normally, it's not a block level backup, right? That would be a forensic backup. Normally, it's just a backup of the data, in your standard full backups. Costly because it takes a lot of time. That's the biggest reason we don't do. You may not do fulls all the time. And there's lots of different strategies between these two. I should point out, in the real world, for the test, full, incremental, and differential is all you're going to need to know. So incremental backups is anything that's changed since the last backup of any kind. So when you think about this, if I'm doing a full backup, because you might get asked, if I'm doing a full backup and then incrementals daily. So I do full backups on Monday and I do incrementals Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and the system crashes. How many tapes am I going to need to restore that? Right? You're going to need the last full and every incremental. So you'll need every one of those tapes to restore in an incremental backup solution. I wouldn't be surprised if they asked that question. Whereas the differential, I only need my last full and my last differential, right? So it's quicker to restore from differentials. It's less tapes. That's one of the reasons why I might decide to do, differentials. But a differential will also take more time because between the time my last full backup and my next full backup, there's a lot more things that have changed, right? So those differentials, it may take 15 minutes day one of my differential, whereas it might be hours, by the time I get to my next full. If that makes sense. So differentials, all the files that have changed since the last full backup. You only need two. Whereas incrementals of many backups as you've done since the last full. It gets to be a pain in the butt when you're doing, there were days when we were
Well, especially if one of them's corrupted. So test, 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 test.
Right. Well, that goes back to this too. That's one of the reasons why we did move from, because it's magnetic media, and they do deteriorate. They do go bad. All right. Other things: redundant array of inexpensive disks. This is more fault tolerance and resilience. Here, this is more, back restoring from backup. These are the different types of RAID levels that you'll need to know exam, and then there's every combination known to man of these RAID levels, but these are the ones that are the most basic. So this is a good table to memorize. So RAID 0, stripe set, RAID 1, that's a mirrored set. So a stripe set, a RAID 0, there's no redundancy, there's no fault tolerance. There's redundancy, no fault tolerance in a RAID 0 because there's no parity. In any stripe set, you need to have the parity stripe or the parity bits or the parity blocks in order to basically rebuild the, the, the drive that failed. So in a RAID 0, super high performance, high, read write, but no, you reduced your fault tolerance, because when I had just one disk, or say two disks, uh, that, that's a lot less likely for two disks to fail than one of 10. So as your stripe set gets bigger, that gets riskier. So RAID 0, no fault tolerance there. RAID 1, that's a mirrored set. Basically what's written to this disk gets written to this disk. That's a RAID 1. RAID 3 is byte level striping parity, and RAID 4 is, those two are really similar. One's byte level and one's block level. So if you remember, I don't know if we talked about it with the drive geometry, but there are blocks on drives, and so it's based on the drive geometry, whereas RAID 3 is based on what's been actually written in the file table. So a little different. So here's our RAID arrays, and Ryan left me again, and I'm like really sad now. You're back.
Back.
What did you do? What did I do? Did I say something?
No, so I've had to drink an excessive amount of water from the COVID shot, so I can't sit as still as long without breaks in between.
Plus, there's an age thing. The older you get, the more you got to go do that.
Yeah, I know that part too. I don't like it, but I know it well.
Right. All right. So yeah, here's our RAID array. So mirroring is that's a RAID 1. Basically what's written on one drive is written on the other. You want to memorize this. You probably see an exam question about read write times. Write times are always slower because I have to write to 2, whereas read times are faster because I have to read from 1. So that's why in mirroring, write times are slower, read times are faster. Now, in reality, it's all done in hardware now. So it's all control. So it's just as fast either way. But the exam is going to go with this. It's more costly because I have to double up on everything. So if I have 10 drives that I'm mirroring, I've got 10 drives that get used for mirroring. That's the difference with that piece of redundancy. Now, striping is just writing across drives, right? So sharing the writes across drives, always going to be, faster read and write, but no redundancy built in specifically to striping. You have to have the parity. That's where you get the redundancy, and you can get parity is used to rebuild a broken drive, right? So those are RAID things. There's what a striped set looks like. So you've got no parity stripe. It's just A, B, and this is only 2 drives. You could do this across 1,000 if you wanted to. The bad thing here is if any one of those 1,000 drives goes bad, your entire array is gone. It's rebuilt on that middle piece. And not knowing, you know, where things were written like that with the parity, it's a pain. You could get it back, but it's a pain in the butt and it's going to cost you a lot of money. But that's a RAID 0. RAID 1 is just mirrored set, right? So it's that's your redundancy. It's written to both drives. High disk cost. So things to remember about RAID 1, the mirror is write performance is slower, read performance is faster, higher disk cost. Those three things is all you need to know about RAID 1. RAID 2, Hamming code, no, that's just, it never worked out. So it was a good, maybe thought, good design. Uh, it was not used. 14 or 39 disks is what was used. That's Hamming code. So that's what happened to RAID 2. RAID 3, and it's also not likely to be tested, but you get this that a lot when you go RAID 1 to RAID 3, like, well, what happened to 2? Didn't work. So RAID 3 and RAID 4 are basically the same. The only difference is how that parity stripe or that how that parity is written. It's either going to be by byte level or block level. RAID 3 is byte level. It's more common than RAID 4 uh, because it was easier. I think it was easier to implement. It was cheaper to implement. But here you've got an additional disk to store the parity information. So let's say I've got 5 drives. So it's not writing. It's got 5 drives. One drive is dedicated to the parity. That's how these two work. Whereas 5 is distributed parity. Parity is written across the drive array, right? So I could lose any one of the drives in a RAID 5 and it could be rebuilt with the parity on the other drives, right? Whereas on RAID 3 or RAID 4, if my parity drive goes to crap, I can't rebuild. It's a dedicated parity drive. Parity is not written across the array. Hopefully that makes sense. That's the difference between all of these RAID configurations. Now you've got all kinds of different combinations, right? You've got RAID 50, RAID 60. There's other RAIDs now, but these are the ones that will be on the exam. There's what a RAID 5 looks like. So you see the parity, we would call it parity stripe. That it was written across the drives. RAID 6, stripe set with this dual distributed parity. This means you'd be able to fail 2 drives because it's distributed parity rather than writing 1 parity across the drives, you're writing 2. So it could still rebuild if you lost more than 1 drive. And you could go even further than that. And that's all usually controlled in the hardware controller. RAID 1 and 0 or RAID 10. So that would be a mirrored stripe set. That's, just get you, I guess, better performance. Across the drive is a little less expensive for redundancy potentially. And then you see all the other RAID arrays. 01, 10, 50, 60, 100. I doubt you're going to see those on the exam. What you're going to see is 1 through 5 or 0 through 5. 6 you probably won't even see either, but maybe if you do, there it is. And other types of fault tolerance, certainly redundant hardware. The rule of thumb when we're building redundancy into systems is any moving parts are more likely to fail than non-moving parts. So fans, in chassis are more likely to fail, including fans on processors, right? It's a moving part. So it's when a fan goes out in a chassis, well, then you're going to overheat. And when you overheat, any electronic component could, punk out on you. So we'd always carry multiple power supplies, had fans. So we always carry multiple power supplies. So we could switch those out. We always carried multiple fans. We also carried multiple hard drives. That's why, these RAID stuff was very important because they're all spinning really fast with a little head that goes back and forth and has to find all that data. That's prone to failure. Now we're all, not all, but most of us are using, hello.
SSD.
Thank
Solid
you.
state.
Yeah. Solid state. So no moving parts. Therefore, those drives last a hell of a lot longer. Usually, right? But anyway, redundant hardware, that would be one fault tolerant piece where, you need to have those things on hand. You could do entirely redundant systems, which you would do on really high transaction, high importance systems. In a little bit, we'll talk about redundant uh, data centers. You know, in some environments, the things that are banks are really popular with this, like U.S. Bank. When I worked at U.S. Bank, we had our main processing center in St. Paul, and then we had a redundant data center in Oregon. Right, so they're both, and they were uh, both live, right? So
Yeah, I
they're
was gonna
both
say hot, hot, active, active.
yeah. Yep. So you can go anywhere from that, entire data centers where they're fully redundant, active, to just having some spares sitting on the shelf that you can switch out when something goes bad. And that's all going to be dictated by what we're going to get to in a little bit, which will be our recovery time objective. How long can we live with this thing being down before we're really going to suffer for it? So that leads us to this: business continuity and disaster recovery plans. Two different plans. We use them interchangeably all the time. They're different plans. Business continuity plan is not a disaster recovery plan. They're different. Business continuity is the thing to remember. Business continuity is long-term, entire business. So scope is much wider, and it's a long-term plan, meaning you would for as long as it takes to get the business back. Whereas disaster recovery plan is typically IT focused, right? IT focused and short to midterm. It fits within the business continuity plan. Different plans. Businesses should have both plans, but whatever. Other plans: continuity of operations plan, which you might see in the exam, which is it keeps the operational part of the business function. A disaster itself, that's going to be really important for you to define specifically what is a disaster in your disaster recovery plan. Man, people are typing a lot of stuff. Are you watching all that?
I am.
Wording? Man alive. Okay. Disaster, disruptive event, whatever it is, man-made. Usually it's man-made or it's natural disasters. Disaster plan, that's the short-term plan for recovering from those events. Meantime between failures is, how long you can expect something to be operational before, on average, it'll fail. There's usually the manufacturer of the equipment can tell you the meantime between failures because they're testing that equipment. And then meantime to repair is how long it takes to fix it. Those are all really important metrics for our disaster recovery plan or business continuity plan. So here's the business continuity plan. Make sure the business basically remains viable. If you're viable, you're probably talking about a business continuity plan. Uh, yeah, it may be due to an IT disaster. It may be due to a significant disruption in personnel where your IT is, completely still intact.
I worked for an organization that, their BCP included physical disasters, digital disasters, market crashes, you name it. And they had a very robust plan, including entire off-site office buildings that they could bring online. So they had standby office space, phones, the whole deal, so that they could bring that on as part of the BCP while they figured out the nature of the disaster and started to go down the various DR routes.
Yep. So important things to remember about business continuity plan: the entire business, wide scope, long term. Disaster recovery plan, IT oriented, short to medium term. Disaster recovery plans have a lot of IT operational things in them, usually references to, or they contain the procedures themselves to restore systems. Um, Keep those. I've seen disaster recovery plans not be stored off site, which kind of sucks when you have a disaster that affects your site. That's happened. I've seen people not protect recovery keys. So meaning your backup was encrypted and you didn't protect the restoration key, so you got backups that are useless. I've seen that too. You'd cover all those things in your disaster recovery plan, but that also reinforces the reason why you want to test these things. The wrong time to find out your disaster recovery plan sucks is when you have a disaster. So relationships between the business continuity plan and disaster recovery plan, they are two completely different things. I can't emphasize that enough. There's NIST SP 800-34, a good document. This is what excuse me, the cover of that looks like. And it's funny because if you look at the date of that special publication, it's May 2010. I thought, well, that's because the basics never change, right? I mean, the basics are the basics. There's not much to change in it. This is a really good diagram that sort of shows you the relationships between the plans. So you see the business continuity plan is the big one in the middle. Everything else sort of connects to it. You've got the cyber incident response plan, which is a short term, obviously meant to restore, or I guess get the business sort of recovered from a cyber incident, which we've already talked about. Continuity support plan, IT contingency plan, those are used interchangeably. That's usually like tech support, right? So when people know who to call, when to call, kind of stuff. The DRP itself, the business recovery resumption plan, which is what it is. It's how do we resume? How do we put things sort of back to where they were? The crisis communications plan and occupant emergency plan, which is about personnel. But those are all important plans. Um, most organizations don't have, I'd say most organizations don't have, but you know, should have at least the business continuity plan and the disaster recovery plan and the incident response plan. Those are the three
These
big
are the
ones.
things that'll save you in the crisis.
Yeah, one, and sadly, not many people have sat across from the president or the CEO or the owner of a company and had to tell them that their business is not going to recover. Or you tell them this is the state of affairs and they're like, we're not going to survive this. That's a really shitty place to be, man. You know, I've done it. So, and a lot of times because you didn't plan, you try to help. So, classifications of disasters, there's natural, human, and environmental disasters. A lot of times, well, environmental, the difference between environmental and natural, because sometimes people get that mixed up, is environmentals are like power, uh, cooling, heating, those types of things are, the environmental type disasters. The number one thing to go out in data centers is still power, followed pretty closely to, network outages. So, certainly planning for those two as being the most common. Human, man, that we've had a lot of human stuff happen the last 12 months. A lot of plans probably should have changed from that, whether it be social unrest or be, uh, pandemic related craziness. The human threats definitely changed this last year, and the natural threats. These are, just in general. I guess it's a pretty good table to look at. This comes from our own tool, so this is what we use, when we're doing risk assessments. The one on the left is natural disasters. These are the kind of natural disasters that we're typically, accounting for, and then the crime index. The crime index kind of goes all over the place. The thing about crime indexes that are a little bit funky is it requires on what the authorities are going to report. Some police departments don't do a very good job of reporting regularly the crimes that happen in that area, so you're kind of stuck with what you got. Other types of disruptive events, errors and omissions, people fat fingering things, people tripping over power cords, stuff like that. That stuff happens too. Data entry mistakes are the most common. I mean, even more common than power outages is probably those, but they're typically not to the level of a disaster. It's more of a disruptive event. Natural disasters, lots of those that you need to account for. That's just another place. So this comes from, if you want to monkey around, go to USA.com. I think that's where this came from. Just go to USA.com, type in your own address and see what kind of things are in your neighborhood and stuff. Electrical power problems, we've talked about those before, but the difference between bloods, brownouts, spikes, surges, um, those are all testable for sure. And then what we put in place to protect ourselves from those, obviously UPS systems, power conditioning systems, which usually a UPS system has that built into it. Backup generators for longer disruptive events. Temperature and humidity failures. Um, Servers, network, electronics do not like humidity. don't like overly dry either, right? Humidity leads to corrosion, overly dry leads to static. So both bad things. So keeping those things within range, but those are disruptive events. If your HVAC system goes out in your server room, that's going to suck for a while. Warfare, terrorism, sabotage. That's how I call it. Sabotage. Isn't that cool? Sabotage is better than sabotage. Don't you think?
Sabotage. I like it. Tomato, tomatoes, sabotage, sabotage.
Sabotage. Yeah. You want to protect yourself from sabotage.
Well, this is growing.
It kind of depends on.
This is a growing area. This will be on the exam, I'm sure, but this is definitely a growing area where the cyber war has come home to roost in the private sector.
Well, there's that, and there's also the physical risks in place that you didn't see it even 12 months ago, or say 18 months ago. Right? We used to give really good ratings if you're near law enforcement because criminals weren't attacking near police stations. But then, we had this flip flop that happened, post George Floyd, where now people are attacking police stations. You know what I mean? So it's like, well, crap, that changed everything. So you just kind of never know where it's going to flare. That's the thing that's different nowadays from even just a few years ago. It was pretty static. Now it goes quick. So taking those things into account, really important. Financially motivated attackers, that is the number one attacker. I think last data I saw, by the year 2025, they're expecting $10 trillion to be yeah, that's how big the enterprise is, for criminal activity. Money's number one. Even the Colonial Pipeline attack, right? That was money motivated. That wasn't state sponsored, cyber war. They wanted their money. That's a big deal. Personnel shortages. That's also a big deal. How do you account for if a key security person or a key person in the organization dies or leaves or whatever, or if you need to hire, like right now, the executive order, Biden's executive order. We've talked about this, you and I offline. CISA is going to need probably 400-ish new security people just to get their part of that executive order completed.
Yeah, it's significant.
Yeah. So, and that's going to have to come from somewhere, right? That's going to have to either come from the private sector or I don't know. It's got to come somewhere. So this is just an old thing. This isn't testable, but it's important. It's kind of neat to see what the trends were. And obviously in a while since this has been updated, but this is where most of the attacks and breaches were coming from. It was financially motivated. Espionage was definitely on the rise. Yeah. Other personnel shortage things, pandemics, disease. I guess a couple of years ago, we would have said, well, that's never going to happen, but oh boy. All right. So pandemics, disease, how are you going to account for that? I think a lot of people revisited their disaster recovery plans this last year, because of what took place. Strikes, that's a big deal, especially if you're in a place where you've got union personnel. Where we live, it kind of is a long time ago now, but I still remember it like it was yesterday. The Northwest Airlines mechanic strike. I mean, that crippled them, and eventually Delta came in and bought it and whatever. But I still remember that. How are you going to account for that? Personnel availability, semi-critical. Communications failures. This is really backhoes, man. Backhoe operators. I don't know who you call Gopher One. That's who we got out here in Minnesota. They map, where your utility lines are. And then some dude comes in a backhoe and tears it all up. Tears up like, oh man, it's a pain in the butt. And I've seen companies, with redundant telecom lines that they ran on the same side of the street.
Through the same conduit, I bet too.
No, different conduit, but the same side of the street.
Yeah, that doesn't help.
No, didn't help at all. Yeah. So communications failures, those happen often, and you need to account for those. All right, so the disaster recovery process, I'm going to pick up speed here a little bit because we do have, quite a bit more to get through. Always, always, always on the exam, going to be the answer. If there's anything to do with personnel safety, that's your answer. That trumps everything. Um, Data, who cares, right? If somebody loses their life or somebody's life is in jeopardy, that's where you go. Same with DR. So the process, well, you need to respond, meaning something triggered something. You usually have somebody within the organization who is the person responsible for declaring an emergency or declaring a disaster, right? It's either a person or it's a team, but somebody needs to make that call. You don't just kind of waffle and like, well, I think it's a disaster, because you do want to get on this right away, right? The quicker you can identify that it's a disaster, the quicker you're going to get, so respond and then activate the team. Lots of ways you'll activate the team. We'll talk about call trees in a little bit, but everybody's got to get, and everybody should know what their role is. That's why we test these things. So when you get the call, you're like, okay, this is where I go. This is what I do, so on and so forth. Communicate, same kind of thing with incident response. Internal and external communications have to be really tight. Who is responsible for communicating, and who's your backup for communicating if that person's not available. You don't want multiple messages coming out of a disaster recovery team, right? So Jane says this and John says that. That's not going to help, right? Jane's responsible for saying things. It didn't come from Jane, then it didn't. It's not real, right? That's really important in communications. Make sure it's out of band, right? Cell phone isn't really out of band, potentially, right? Maybe you need to have a burner phone from a different carrier. My cell phone is AT&T. What if AT&T is affected by this disaster too? How will I communicate? You know, uh, Carrier pigeons, maybe,
Smoke
but
signals.
something. You just got to have something, man. What we've had before in disaster recovery plans is if if you don't hear any communication, that means the communications lines that we had have gone down. So we have an assembly point. That's really common. So everybody, if you don't hear anything in 30 minutes or 3 hours, whatever, go here. And it would be someplace not next to your office, because that'd be bad too, possibly. All right. So communicate, assess, you need to make an initial assessment. How bad is this thing? How far is this going to go? Who else is affected? What assets do I still have available to me? All those things have to come into play when you do that. The assessment phase, you really need to pull it all together, figure out what you got, what you don't. And then reconstitution, putting things back together. It's like Legos, man. Come in, you destroy all the Legos, and then you put those Legos back together the way they were, right? That's reconstitution. All right, so the high level, this is the high level, how you create these things, the business continuity / disaster recovery. They follow essentially the same process in putting some of these things together. I would say this is more disaster recovery than it is business continuity, because you've got business impact analysis there, which is typically more of a DR plan thing that feeds into the BCP. But start with the project initiation. Somebody needs to sponsor this thing. It's going to cost money. It's going to cost time. Having an executive say, yeah, this is a project that's important to us and we're going to do it. And that would initiate the project. What's the scope going to be? So in a disaster recovery plan, you might have multiple disaster recovery plans for an organization. Like I said, take Cargill, for instance. Cargill does not have one disaster recovery plan. They have hundreds of
Many,
disaster
many,
recovery plans.
many, 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 many. They have many business continuity plans.
Exactly. So the scope, where does this apply? Where does this not apply? That's really important too. Conducting your business impact analysis, this is going to tell you how important certain assets are to your organization and how quickly you need to get them recovered. So that's a recovery time objective is the big one that comes out of the BIA. But preventative controls. So if the reason why preventative controls comes after business impact analysis is, let's say that we find a server that its maximum allowable downtime MAD, or maximum tolerable downtime, used interchangeably. Let's say that its MTD is an hour. And when you do an analysis of this server, you're like, well, we couldn't recover this thing in any sooner than like 5, right? So you've got a mismatch, 5 to 1. You're going to need to put some preventative controls in place to bring that back into alignment. So you might have to put some redundancy in place. That would be a preventative control, preventing disruption in the first place. Uh, the recovery strategy, what are we going to do to recover it? Plan, design, and development, implementation, training, and testing. A lot of people get through the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps and forget about 7 and 8. You just pissed away a whole bunch of money. That's where you stopped. You do need to do some implementation. You do need to do some training, and you need to regularly test it. All kinds of different tests you can do. Tabletop testing probably being the most common, and then you maintain it, right? Uh, Maintaining it would be tying it in with your change control processes for one, right? If you've got changes happening to the servers and or work state, whatever you're changing, and it's not reflected in your disaster recovery plan, well, then it's not as effective, right? Updating network diagrams, all those things should be part of the maintenance piece. There's 800-34 again. Did I see so many type squirrels? I like squirrels.
Yes, squirrels are a type of disaster. Squirrels have caused internet outages at my house and at businesses around the world.
That's right. Yeah, my dog chases squirrels. It's fun. All right, so project initiation. This is step 1, right? First thing you need to do is a policy. Policy is your authorization to do what it is you're about to do. If it's not in policy, you don't have authorization to do it. Even if you've got a verbal authorization to do it. I don't know if you've ever worked in with management before where they've changed their mind or they forgot that they gave you permission. That's why we like policy, right? And I've always said as a CISO, if I can't find what I'm about ready to do somewhere in policy, I don't have the authority to do it. I got to go back.
Absolutely, and it's often overlooked. So policy is super key, and it doesn't even have to be laborious. I've seen some very lightweight policies that gave the necessary authorizations and serve their purpose well. So
right, and that's why this even says a policy statement. Even if all you can get out of executive management is just a statement, not a full-blown policy, fine, get that. You just need to have something that really authorizes you to do this. Plus, a lot of times executive management doesn't talk to executive management. So you've got, maybe the CFO who said, yeah, I'm cool, go for it. And the CIO is like, what the hell are you doing? Right. He said, she said stuff. That cool either. All right. So number 1, policy statement. Number 2, business impact analysis. Number 3, what are those preventative controls? Develop your recovery strategies. How would we recover should something bad happen? And then, your contingency plan itself, which is a little bit more narrowly focused than your recovery strategies, right? It's the more tactical, step-by-step procedural stuff that goes into step 5. Step 6 is, all right, now we got this plan, let's test it. Usually cycle back, after 6 and go back to 4, maybe even back up to 3 on, okay, this is what we learned from testing. Let's revise the plan. It just wasn't functional. I don't think we could have done it, within the MTDs, meaning maximum tolerable downtime. And then maintenance, keep that thing up to date. Management support, C-level, agree, do it. Ideally, it'd be the CEO. The top of the chain is the best. Usually CFOs, CIOs, COOs report to the CEO. So get the CEO. That's the best place to go. But definitely whoever you report to. Most organizations, the CISO reports to the CIO. They should probably report to CEO, but certainly get it from who you report to as a C-level. Then you'll need a project manager. Project managers are good at organizing stuff, putting stuff together, wrangling up the cats, making sure things line up. Usually a good wrangler, right? They're a good leader. They can whip people into shape, bring things into alignment. They usually don't have to be anything technical. That's your DRP or BCP project manager. The continuity planning project team is the team that you're going to assemble to actually vet out all of this stuff. You want to have different parts of your organization in this team. Right? This isn't just IT. You need to have somebody from HR. You need to have somebody from the business, maybe somebody from sales, somebody from marketing, somebody from finance, right? You want to have a bunch of different people on this team because they're going to give you their perspectives. Really important. It's important here for developing the plan, but it's also important. You're going to use these people to do your business impact analysis. Right? It's a lot easier for me to get good information from the accounting people if I've got the CFO on my team. Right? Where's the CTO? We don't do technology. I don't know what you're talking about, man.
Hiding, looking for a new job, updating his resume.
Updating his resume. Yeah. No, the CTO's on there too. Lots of C levels. There's so many damn C levels now. I've seen CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, Chief, what's culture officer?
Well,
CC.
the chief innovation officer. That's my favorite.
Yeah. There's all kinds of C's now. All right. So then you'll scope the project. Again, what does it apply to? Bunch of if-then statements, I guess, usually help in kind of identifying what the objectives are of the project. Executive management, this is the minimum that what we're looking for in that statement, right? Their support that they initiate, their approval once we're done. So in that statement, then if we want their final approval, it's ideal if we can get the objective for the business continuity plan or the disaster recovery plan in the policy, because then we can go back and say, look, we did the objective, and that's going to make the approval a lot better. Just a way to tighten it all up. Executive management is always concerned about due care and due diligence because that's where liability lives. That's where civil cases get lost. Is we didn't do what we were supposed to do. We didn't do what Chief Bacon Officer. Hell yeah. Can I be
Come
the
on,
Chief Bacon
squirrel.
Officer?
We still got slides to do.
Oh, I want bacon. All right. Assessing the critical state. This is where you're going to do the business impact analysis. The business impact analysis, lots of ways you can do this. You can do this through questionnaires. That's been my favorite way to do it is, here, answer these series of questions. And the questionnaires are survey. Go here, fill out this survey about these assets that you've been called the owner of. So you're going to have to go through some level of asset inventory and classification of your assets, right? Who's the owner of this thing? Big companies, man, you'd be crazy how many, when there's an incident and you're like, whose system is that? You're like, I don't know. Was it? I don't know. Can I turn it off? No. Well, the hell is it doing? That's not uncommon. So that's usually you sucked at some of this stuff. So mapping is your IT asset. This is the affected group. That would be the affected group is the owner typically. That's usually synonymous. So in here, timekeeping system version 3.0, all employees. Well, that's not a very good owner. Then you'd have to go back and find out who actually uses this system to get something done. So this would be maybe finance, right? In this case, the process effective, and then the business impact. That business impact, then you want to put metrics to it, time, right? We need to map this eventually to this criticality to a time function because we need to get our maximum tolerable downtime. So yeah, questionnaires, you can do this through workshops. You can do this through interviews, all kinds of ways you can get your business impact analysis completed. Stop talking about bacon. I can't focus. All right. So this is what we want to get to, this maximum tolerable downtime. And I can't, as the IT person or the CISO, I can't tell you what your maximum tolerable downtime is. I don't use this system. I don't know how it affects the business. You have to do the business impact analysis where they give you those answers. And then you start prioritizing your assets based on that maximum tolerable downtime. It's basically how long we can live with this thing before it's dead. Another word of caution when you do your business impact analysis is everybody thinks their system is the most important system in the company. Right?
Yes,
So
they
they're going to give
do.
you a maximum, they're going to give you a maximum tolerable downtime of like 13 seconds. Right? So you have to have a feedback in your business impact analysis to really, vet that stuff out. So identify your business impact analysis, identify those critical assets. If I don't have an asset inventory, that's going to be really difficult. What are the most critical things in this environment? Do your risk assessment, which you can do. There's lots of ways you can do risk assessments too, right? Threats and vulnerabilities, and then tie it back to, well, here are the things that are most likely to happen kind of thing. In practice, I don't typically go there. I usually just do how important is this system? How long can with it being dead kind of thing. But if you were going to do your risk assessment, these would be the things, the vulnerability and then the mitigation. Other things, maximum recoverable downtime. So two metrics go into my maximum tolerable downtime. One is the recovery time objective. That's a function of time. How long, you know, the maximum tolerable downtime is how long can I live without it being dead? But recovery time objective is what's the objective? How quickly can I get that thing recovered and how much work is going to go into it? Right. So those two functions, really uncommon to break them out into two different metrics. It's more common to do just the how long can we live without it being around. But in a formal sense, and what you'll probably see in the exam is your RTO and WRT are part of your MTD. So getting that and maybe taking this and writing it down as RTO plus WRT equals MTD. We talk about that writing down thing. Other words for maximum tolerable downtime, maximum allowable downtime. I already used that once where I switched between MAD and MTD. That's pretty common. Maximum tolerable outage and maximum acceptable outage. Those are all, synonymous. The most common, though, by far is maximum tolerable downtime, followed by, I'd say, MAD. All right, other metrics, recovery point objective. That's really basically how much data I can afford to lose. That's gonna affect your backups. How often you're doing your backups, whether you're going to be backing up transaction logs and the database or just the database, right? Things like that come into your recovery point objective. In some cases, you can deal with an entire day of transactions and still function okay, right? Or you go to a paper-based thing. Recovery time objective, that's that first part of the MTD, basically. Same with WRT. We've already talked about that. The mean time between failures is how long I can expect this thing to run before it dies on average. Everything, electronic does have a mean time between failures. Whether or not you know it, or whether or not the manufacturer disclosed it is a whole nother thing. It's not all that common really to go figure that stuff out anymore because a lot of equipment is just made better than it used to be. Meantime to repair. So if we were going to repair, so we, say switching out a hard drive, a failed drive, or a failed power supply, how long does it take for you to get there? How long does it take for you to maybe power down the system, switch it out, power it back up again? That's your mean time to repair. Or how long does it take to get a technician to come in and do their little piece? Um, and then minimum operating requirements that usually applies to environmentals. So you don't want to bring up a new server, in somebody's office, right? That wouldn't meet the minimum operating requirements. You have to have a certain temperature, certain power draw, um, uh, telecom has to be appropriate. So, you would define that stuff when you're building your disaster recovery plan and your asset inventory piece, where, what connects to what and what does this thing need to function?
Well,
You
and
didn't
one
get it done.
caveat I'll call out is
Yeah.
also keep in mind that there can be interdependencies and prerequisites. So for example, if you've got a total outage, even though the RTO on that particular application might be 2 hours, it might take you 6 hours to get the directory structure restored, to get the controllers back in place. So you need to be factoring that in as well when you're going through your continuity plans, is remember that there are interdependencies you have to account for that will affect timelines.
Very true. Yep. Very true. Good point. All right. So there's your recovery point objective. Thing to remember, maximum amount of work that you can lose and still recover. That's RPOs are always based on data. There's our RTO and our WRT, just a little more. And there's our math. The MTD equals RTO plus WRT. Recovery time objective, work recovery time, each maximum tolerable downtime. That's what all that means. You may have to memorize it the first time, but really when you understand what these functions are, it makes it make a lot more sense. Mean time between failures, talked about this, how long a system will run before it dies. Everything's got an MTBF, everything, right? Things will only work for as long as they're going to work before they die. Some cases it's really, really, really long. And there's an example of, LCD monitors. This will also lead you to how much maybe you need to keep on hand in terms of equipment. Uh, you know, How long it'll take to recover a failed system. We talked about mean time to repair, minimum operating requirements. Is really usually about environmentals, which we talked about. So once you've gotten through all of that, now you've got hopefully you've got a really good handle on what are your critical assets and how long you can live without them being around or being down, how much data you can afford to lose in those critical assets, and what are the minimum requirements you need to run them. Right. So at that point, that's your bit. That is the focus of your business impact analysis. You need to get those metrics, however you decide to do it. Because then you're going to compare that to, well, okay, we have a maximum tolerable downtime of X, but we can't support that because we don't have enough space. That's when you get talk about different strategic controls potentially you could put in place to bring it into alignment. So we can now support a 1 hour maximum tolerable downtime on this particular piece of equipment because we've got redundancy now, or we've got whatever. And then your recovery strategy. How are we going to put these things about, and all that stuff comes there. And then we may have to do these things. So this will be very testable. Cold site, warm site, hot site, and redundant site. You'll need to know these things. Now, I highlighted in the slides what those metrics are so that when you see them on the exam, you'll be able to answer them pretty quickly. Supply chain management is about, and I'm going to get to that. That comes like really soon. So supply chain management is, if you're going to need to get equipment here, how are you going to get it here? If you can't accommodate that with your supply chain, well, then you better have some on stock. You better stock up on some things, almost like prepper, right? Time to start prepping.
Well, we're living this nightmare right now because we have supply chain management issues. We are looking at a huge deficiency in chipsets, available replacement equipment. So if you are responsible for a DR plan, you might want to go back and relook at that, relook at your BIA as well, because you may struggle to get gear here for the next 6 months to a year.
Yeah, very good point. And it's also important maybe to have multiple suppliers. So if one
It can
supplier is
help.
unavailable, you can go to somewhere else. And you can sometimes set up SLAs with your supply chain, certain parts of it anyway. So if they guarantee to have a new piece of equipment in here within 24 hours. Now, that sort of sucks if they don't live up to it, because the last thing you're kind of going to do is get legal involved when you can't equipment and your system's back up and running, but you can do it. Telecom management, having multiple circuits is always a good idea where it makes sense. Um, but yeah, that's also going to be another issue. It used to be, now today it's a lot less of an issue because I've got a lot of different options for bandwidth than what I used to have. Uh, used to have to basically be hardwired and that was it. There was no backup. But now you can do all sorts of cool things with satellite, with cellular, you know, but you need to take care of that. Make sure you have that documented and what you're going to do. Utility management, recovery options. Yep, all really important. So this is where we get to those 4 different sites. So redundant site, real time, right? There's no downtime at the redundant site, right? There's a failover, or they're both running it simultaneously. Sometimes it's a load balance where you're actually using both at the same time. But the thing to remember about redundant sites is real time. There's no downtime here. Super expensive, right? Hot sites, less than an hour. So the things I have in a hot site is I've already got basically everything there. There might be a slight switchover, a manual switchover of some sort that needs to happen, but all my hardware is there. All my applications are there. All my data is basically there. I just need to kind of flip the switch. That's a hot site, also very expensive. So it gets less expensive the more time I can handle being down, the less expensive it's. Redundant sites and hot sites are expensive. Warm sites, this is your maximum tolerable downtime of 1 to 3 days, right? This is where I'll probably have to restore some things from backup, but otherwise, just about everything else is there. That's your warm site. Now, cold site is basically there's a place for my stuff, but there's no stuff there. I might have some hardware there, But typically I don't. Typically I have to have that either shipped in or it's in storage. That's a cold site. You're talking weeks, right, for a cold site. So it's, as you're devising a recovery strategy, right, you need to pick the right type of site. Now today we've moved so many things to the cloud that it's really a cloud function now, right? Microsoft has all this kind of taken care of, or Amazon has this taken care of. But some of us still have data centers that we need to make sure that we account for these things. Reciprocal agreements, I've seen these a lot. I've seen them used a lot, but I've never seen one actually work. Meaning, when it comes to enforce it, uh, you know, you make a reciprocal agreement typically with a like kind type of business. Printing is really I've seen this happen in printing, where a print shop will make arrangements with another print shop that, hey, if we go down, you'll take my load, right? You'll take my orders, make sure that my customers get serviced, and and we'll pay you for that, and vice versa, right? If the same thing happens to you, we'll do it over here. Um, it, you know, in theory, that works pretty well, and I've never seen it actually work well in practice because in my in, if I'm making a reciprocal agreement with say another printing company and I'm at near capacity, I'm servicing my customers before I service yours. I'm sorry. I don't care if we get an agreement or not. That's what typically happens. So be careful with mutual aid agreements or reciprocal agreements. It's a contract basically where you agree to share.
Yeah, the only time I've ever seen this stuff actually work in the real world is between municipalities with regards to emergency services, water, power, things like that.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that would work. Mobile sites is another recovery strategy. So basically, it's a data center on wheels. They roll it in and set it up, plug it in, and you're good. You see these on big semi trailers. It's a service you can pay for. They also have SLAs, and they usually don't oversubscribe. So uh, they've got like here in Minnesota, they've already got trailers here in Minnesota. They can roll them in within a couple of hours and get you set up and rolling. Now, if they got say 10 customers here, they they would try to accommodate that. I've never seen them oversubscribe before, but I'm sure it could happen. But that's one thing to be worried about. If you're going to go with a mobile site, ask them how they handle oversubscription. Be important to know. Other things, subscription services. So subscription service, IBM is really good at this. Sun Guard is good at this. A bunch of them. Where basically they're just going to take it. Take my disaster recovery. They'll do the plan. They'll do everything. Uh, you know, okay. Other plans. So remember that BCP is the big plan. You've got the disaster recovery plan. The other plans we haven't talked about that we're going to get to real quick are these others, continuity of operations, business resumption recovery plan, continuity of support, cyber incident response plan, which we already covered, occupant emergency and crisis management plan. Those are all real quick. We'll go through those. That's a table for you. I think it also, probably comes from your book. So continuity of operations, procedural, maintaining operations. That's it. So operational things like delivery, like billing, stuff like that. That's the continuity of operations plan. It's not IT specific. It's more process specific. Who's going to do what, when, kind of thing. Your business resumption plan. So this is how to restore. So once things are kind of getting back to normal, what are the processes we're going to follow to kind of put things back? Now, it could be at an alternative site or it could be at the primary site. It's just about, this is going to be our next after the event's over. So it doesn't always have to be back to the primary site. Sometimes the primary site's completely destroyed. Continuity of support plan is just what it is. It's about IT support. It's about having basically a help desk and somebody who can be there, um, answer those support calls, make sure that the applications are functional, that kind of stuff. Incident response plan we've talked about. The occupant emergency plan. This is about personnel safety, about getting people out safely and putting them some other place safely, right? It's about accommodating them. Usually facilities handles this plan. It's not usually an IT plan. It's not even usually the same. It's not even usually part of the disaster recovery team plan. You would ask your facilities managers to create these plans. Safety and evacuations, come out of that, having assembly points, safety wounds would all be in this plan typically. Crisis management plan. This is about coordination among managers. That's what the crisis management plan is. How are managers going to interact with each other? Who's going to make decisions? What's the chain of command? And if parts of the chain of command are missing, how are we going to, handle that kind of stuff? That's all crisis management plan stuff. Crisis communications plan is really important. It's, what are we going to communicate where, right? And it's important to do it internal and external, which I've driven home more than once. Call trees. So this is part of the crisis management plan and the crisis communications plan because they're both together. Call trees, it's you're not going to have one person call everybody. One person's going to call a group of people. That group of people is going to call another group of people. That so on and so forth until you get through everybody. We don't do it manually anymore. Now you subscribe to a service that does the call tree for you, so you configure it, and it does all the calls for you. And there's a feedback loop wherein you've probably gotten those calls before where you have to press 1 that you confirm you got this message. Right? That way we know who got the message, who didn't get the message, who's still missing, that kind of thing. That all happens in call trees. There's a meta call tree, and there's that press 1 that you acknowledge receipt. That's our feedback that we know you got the message. Command post, that's your emergency operations center or command post or war room. Sometimes people call it, all synonymous with each other. Vital records, got to make sure you have those vital records. Last thing you want is not having a copy of the vital records, so you need the vital records. Vital records, I can't keep calling it vital. Vital records would be licenses, any licenses that you need, checkbooks, might be a vital record, some financial transaction type data, reciprocal agreements, some contracts, having copies of all those. Typically you'd, put those in some kind of a fireproof box or safe and store it 10 miles away or somebody's house or something, right? And that's it. So only 1 minute over, not bad. I think we're leaving off at page 411. That's all I got, man. What you got? Any closing words?
I'll leave you with this. If you don't have a good incident response plan, then you better have a damn good disaster recovery plan.
I say if you don't have an incident response plan, make sure you have a good resume.
And well, you'll be out of a job, but the company will be out of business. But planning is key. I can't stress this enough. And I can assure you in my entire career, the better people planned, the less time it took, the less money it cost, the less likely they were to find themselves in legal quandary or on the news or any of those negative things. So planning is just super, super important.
Well, yeah. And don't forget, when you become a security leader, right? I mean, there's different functions, but as a leader of a security organization, you have to feel the weight of this. This is my when I'm the CISO or whoever, I am responsible for this. If I don't get this right, people suffer. And that's the plain and simple of it. I don't want people to suffer, so I do the best job I can to make sure I've got my T's crossed, my I's dotted, and sleep well at night. All right, brother. Well, get yourself some sleep. I got some emails to get out.
Sounds good. Thanks everybody for being here. We're doing this again on Monday. So see you then.
Right on, brother. Take care.
Bye.